After 25 years of marriage, Elaine Wallace, 56, walked into the attorney's office for the reading of her late husband Victor's will. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it by clasping them in her lap. She had expected grief, perhaps a few surprises, but never humiliation. The room was heavy with silence as the lawyer began to read. Line by line, Victor's assets were listed. The family home that Elaine had lovingly decorated over decades, the joint bank accounts she had contributed to with her savings, and various investments they had built together. Elaine's heart swelled with a faint hope that she and her daughter would share equally, a final gesture of Victor's love and fairness, but that hope shattered in an instant. The house, the bank accounts, and the entire sum of $6 million were to go solely to their daughter, Jessica. The lawyer's voice was steady, almost mechanical, yet every word struck Elaine like a hammer blow. When her name finally appeared in the will, it was attached not to a legacy of comfort or security, but to a single item, a rotting shack on Pine Creek Road, long abandoned and never repaired. The others in the room shifted uncomfortably, sensing Elaine's shock. She could hardly breathe. In her mind, images of that shack surfaced, the peeling paint, broken windows, a sagging roof that barely kept out the rain. It wasn't a home. It wasn't even livable. To receive such a place after 25 years of loyalty and sacrifice felt less like inheritance and more like an insult. As Jessica's lips curled into the faintest smirk, Elaine realized the cruel reality. Her husband's final act had left her stripped of dignity, cast aside in favor of a daughter who now looked at her not as family, but as an obstacle. Betrayal hung in the air heavier than grief, and Elaine's world crumbled before her eyes. The will reading had barely ended when Jessica rose from her chair, her heels clicking sharply against the polished wooden floor. Her expression was cold, detached, more like a landlord evicting a tenant than a daughter addressing her mother. She crossed her arms and announced with a voice that cut through the silence, "The house is mine now. You have 1 week to pack up and leave." Elaine blinked, unable to process the words. This was the home she had poured her life into, where she had celebrated birthdays, tended gardens, and sat by the fire with Victor in quiet evenings. Now, with the stroke of a pen and the sharpness of her daughter's tongue, it was no longer hers. Jessica wasted no time asserting her new authority. She followed Elaine from room to room as boxes were unfolded, her eyes scanning every object. Every family photograph, every heirloom, every piece of furniture seemed to pass through her silent judgment. "Not that, leave it." "That's mine," she snapped whenever Elaine's hands lingered too long on something meaningful. It wasn't just oversight, it was surveillance. Elaine felt stripped of privacy in her own home, as though she were nothing more than an intruder. The sting grew sharper when Jessica called in 2 of her friends to help, though their real task was to ensure Elaine carried nothing of value out the door. The humiliation was unbearable. Elaine, once the heart of this household, now carried her belongings in cardboard boxes, while her daughter looked on with thinly veiled contempt. Finally, on the day she left, Elaine paused at the threshold, her eyes moist as she took one last look at the life that had been stolen from her. Jessica's voice broke the moment. "Maybe Father finally realized the truth, that you were always a burden. That's why you only got that shack on Pine Creek. That's all you ever deserved." The words pierced deeper than any dagger. Elaine's chest tightened as if the air had been sucked from her lungs. She clutched her suitcase, steadied her trembling hands, and walked away without a reply. The front door slammed behind her, echoing like a final judgment. For Elaine, it wasn't just an eviction from a house. It was an exile from her own family, her own worth, her own life. Life in the shack was harsher than Elaine could have ever imagined. The roof sagged in places, its shingles battered by decades of neglect. Cracks in the walls whistled with the winter wind, and at night, shadows of mice darted across the floor. There was no electricity, no running water, only silence broken by the creak of old wood and the distant howl of pine. Creak. Elaine cooked her meager meals over a rusted camping stove and bathed with buckets of cold water drawn from the stream. Each day was a battle for basic dignity. Yet even this physical hardship was nothing compared to the cruelty that followed. Jessica, unsatisfied with merely taking the house and fortune, began her campaign of destruction. She picked up the phone and called relatives, neighbors, and family friends, her voice sweet but laced with venom. She spun elaborate lies, painting Elaine as a greedy widow who had attacked the lawyer during the will reading and threatened to demand money that wasn't hers. Jessica's stories spread like wildfire. Juicy enough to be believed, poisonous enough to destroy. Within weeks, Elaine felt the sting of betrayal from all sides. Phone calls that once brought comfort now went unanswered. Letters remained unopened, invitations stopped arriving. Lisa, her niece who once confided in her late at night about teenage troubles, now sent a curt message. "I think it's best we don't talk for a while." Brenda, her sister-in-law and longtime confidant, blocked her number entirely. The isolation was complete. Friends crossed the street to avoid her. Neighbors whispered behind cupped hands. Elaine would walk into the small grocery store only to feel eyes burning into her back. The weight of unspoken judgment heavier than the bags of food she carried out. Sitting alone in the dim light of a kerosene lamp, Elaine tried to steady her breathing, but the lies replayed in her mind like a haunting echo. How could her own daughter, the child she once cradled and comforted, turn so viciously against her? It wasn't just reputation that Jessica had stolen, it was Elaine's place in the world. She had become a ghost, erased from her family's heart, and painted as an enemy in their eyes. And yet, beneath the suffocating pain, a flicker of something new began to stir. The silence of the shack, once unbearable, now pressed upon Elaine like a challenge. She realized she could either be crushed by Jessica's lies or find a way to rise above them. The storm outside rattled the broken windows, but somewhere within the darkness of Pine Creek Shack, a seed of resolve quietly took root. The days in the shack bled into one another, marked only by the dim glow of dawn and the slow crawl of evening shadows. Elaine's hands grew calloused from carrying buckets of water, her back ached from sleeping on the hard cot, and her heart still throbbed with the ache of betrayal. Yet beneath the loneliness and humiliation, a stubborn ember of strength began to burn. It happened on a morning when she could bear the dust no longer. Elaine armed herself with a broom, determined to sweep away at least one layer of decay from her prison. As she pushed the bristles across the warped floorboards, something unexpected caught her eye. A faint metallic glint between the cracks. Kneeling down, she pried at the floorboard with trembling fingers until it gave way with a groan. There, resting in the hollow beneath, lay a key unlike anything she had ever seen. Heavy and cool to the touch, it was forged from bronze, its surface engraved with delicate, swirling patterns that shimmered faintly in the light of the kerosene lamp. Time had darkened the metal, but the craftsmanship was unmistakable. It was a key meant for something important, something hidden. Elaine held it in her palm, her breath catching. For weeks she had lived in despair, convinced her life had been stripped of meaning. But this key, this mysterious relic buried beneath her feet, was proof that not all was as it seemed. Why would this be here? She whispered to herself, her voice breaking the silence of the shack. The weight of the bronze stirred something inside her. Curiosity, yes, but also a renewed sense of purpose. What lock could this possibly open? What secret had been left for her, and why? For the first time since Victor's will had shattered her world, Elaine felt a spark of anticipation. She clutched the key tightly as if it were a lifeline and sat back on her heels. The despair that had chained her to grief and humiliation began to crack, giving way to the first fragile tendrils of hope. Whatever its purpose, she knew one thing with certainty. The key was not meant to be forgotten. It had been hidden for a reason. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was meant for her. In the stillness of Pine Creek Shack, Elaine's journey shifted. No longer just a story of loss, it was becoming a story of discovery. And somewhere deep within, she felt that this was only the beginning. The bronze key weighed heavily in Elaine's hand for days, whispering of secrets yet to be uncovered. At night she would sit on the edge of her narrow bed, turning it over and over, wondering where it belonged. Finally, one stormy evening, as the wind howled through the cracks of the shack, she decided to search the basement more carefully. The basement was nothing more than a damp cellar, its stone walls streaked with moss and its corners cloaked in shadow. But Elaine's instincts urged her on. She pressed the key against old cabinets, rusted padlocks, and even loose bricks, until, at last, her lantern caught the outline of something strange on the far wall. Hidden behind a stack of rotting crates was a small metal door, no larger than a suitcase. Its surface was tarnished with age, but the keyhole glimmered faintly. Her hands shook as she slid the bronze key inside. It fit perfectly. With a reluctant groan, the lock turned and the door swung open. Inside was not gold or jewels, but something far more precious. A cache of neatly bound documents, and atop them, a sealed envelope with her name scrawled in Victor's familiar handwriting. Elaine's breath caught. She hadn't seen his handwriting since before the illness took him, and the sight alone brought tears to her eyes. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the letter. "My dearest Elaine," it began. Victor's words poured from the page like a final embrace. He confessed that he had seen Jessica's greed long before his passing, the recklessness in her spending, the contempt in her words. He could not entrust her with the family's true legacy, so he had crafted a false inheritance, giving Jessica enough to reveal her true nature, while placing the real fortune where only Elaine's patience and perseverance could find it. The true inheritance, Victor explained, was not the decaying shack, but what lay beneath the land itself. The property contained mineral rights of immense value, veins of clear quartz, amethyst glowing like violet fire, and tourmaline streaked with deep green, all stretching through the hills of Pine Creek. Their estimated worth between $10 and $15 million. Tears streamed down Elaine's face as she read. It wasn't simply about the money, it was the trust. Victor had seen her strength, her integrity, even when she doubted herself. He had left her not only wealth, but validation, proof that she was never the burden Jessica claimed. Elaine pressed the letter to her chest, her sobs echoing softly through the empty cellar. For the first time since Victor's death, she felt truly seen, truly valued. The shack that had symbolized her humiliation was, in fact, the doorway to her redemption, and as the storm raged outside, Elaine realized this was not an ending. This was the beginning of her rise. The morning after discovering Victor's letter, Elaine felt an unfamiliar fire ignite within her. The shack no longer seemed like a prison. It was her fortress, her staging ground. Determined to protect what Victor had entrusted to her, she began to move with quiet precision. Her first step was to contact attorney Peterson, a seasoned lawyer known for his deep expertise in mineral rights. He listened patiently as Elaine unfolded the contents of Victor's letter, showing him the deeds and geological surveys stored in the hidden vault. Peterson's eyes widened as he flipped through the documents. "Mrs. Wallace," he finally said, "what you have here isn't just land. It's a fortune buried beneath Pine Creek. If managed properly, this could secure your future and generations beyond you." Next, Elaine hired Dr. John, a geologist with an impeccable reputation, to appraise the property. For weeks, he surveyed the land, tested samples, and drew up reports. The verdict was staggering. The quartz veins ran deep, the amethyst sparkled with rare clarity, and the tourmaline was of exceptional quality. Conservatively, the mineral rights were valued between $10 and $15 million. Armed with this knowledge, Elaine worked side by side with Peterson to discreetly negotiate a sale. They arranged meetings behind closed doors, using coded language in emails and private calls. By spring, Elaine had secured a buyer ready to pay $12 million, a sum beyond anything she had ever dreamed possible. Meanwhile, Jessica's life was spiraling out of control. Just as Victor had foreseen, she treated her $6 million inheritance as if it were endless. Luxury handbags, designer clothing, imported cars. She bought them all, parading her wealth before friends and strangers alike. Her monthly expenses skyrocketed to over $50,000, with lavish trips booked and canceled at the last minute when her debts began to catch up, but indulgence has its limits. Creditors started circling. Friends who once clung to Jessica for her generosity now whispered behind her back, mocking her recklessness. She borrowed money under false promises, mortgaged future inheritances that didn't exist, and still she could not stop the hemorrhaging of her fortune. Within 6 months, Jessica, once triumphant and arrogant, was staring at the abyss. Elaine watched all of this quietly from the shadows. She never gloated, never intervened, never revealed the truth of her own newfound wealth. Instead, she let Jessica's downfall unfold naturally, just as Victor had intended. And for Elaine, each month that passed brought her closer to both financial security and emotional vindication. Jessica had mocked her, exiled her, and tried to destroy her reputation. But in the end, it was Jessica's own greed that dug her grave. Elaine's only task now was to wait. For sooner or later, desperation would drive Jessica straight back to the very woman she had betrayed. 6 months had passed since Elaine uncovered Victor's secret. The once rotting shack had been reborn. Polished wooden floors gleamed, the air smelled faintly of lavender, and the quiet hum of electricity brought warmth and life. Elaine, now poised and serene, had created not only a home, but a sanctuary, her fortress of dignity. One evening, as the autumn leaves danced across Pine Creek Road, the silence was broken by the hesitant crunch of tires. Elaine looked out the window and froze. A battered old sedan sputtered to a stop. From it stepped Jessica, her once proud daughter, now pale, thin, and visibly broken. Designer clothes, once symbols of arrogance, hung loosely on her frame. Jessica hesitated at the door, her hands trembling as she knocked. For the first time in years, her voice wavered with humility. "Mom, I need to talk. I've made a terrible mistake." Elaine paused, her heart a battlefield of old wounds and maternal instinct. Then, with calm grace, she opened the door wide. "Come in, Jessica." The young woman's eyes widened as she entered. The shack she had mocked was unrecognizable. Warm light filled every corner, soft furniture invited comfort, and shelves lined with books and flowers spoke of peace and strength. For a moment, Jessica seemed unable to breathe. How did you do all this?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Elaine met her gaze steadily. "Because I learned to build, Jessica. To build a life. To build myself. Without greed. Without cruelty. Things you have yet to understand." Tears welled up in Jessica's eyes as she sank into a chair. She confessed between sobs. The inheritance was gone, debts were mounting, and friends had abandoned her. "I thought money would last forever. I thought Dad gave me everything, but I ruined it all." Elaine listened in silence, her expression unreadable. In that moment, the roles had reversed. The daughter who once sneered now sat small and desperate before the mother she had scorned. Victor's plan had come full circle. Elaine, holding not only financial security, but also the power of forgiveness or rejection, was faced with the final choice. She spoke softly, yet firmly, her words like a quiet thunder. "Jessica, wealth without wisdom is a curse. I will not shield you from the consequences of your choices. But if you are truly ready to change, I will not turn you away. The test was never mine, it was yours." Jessica lowered her head, ashamed and trembling. Elaine stood tall, dignified, carrying not bitterness but the strength of survival. For the first time, she no longer felt like the abandoned wife or the unwanted mother. She was the victor, strong, free, and unshakably whole.